Thank you very much. We're very excited to be here to share with you all some of the lessons that we learned. And as you might suspect, if we started in our laundry room, we didn't have a whole lot of money. And when we realized that we were getting into the wine industry, we looked around to see where we might have a little extra space to put an office. And that was the only place we had some extra room. And that was because we couldn't afford a washer and dryer. So there was a big gap there in the room. That's where we put our desk. So we didn't really know what we were doing when we got started. Neither of us were really wine drinkers either, but we kind of fell into the wine vat backwards, you might say. So Michael, you want to tell them a bit about how we got started?
Well, it was all her idea, okay? So she was a consultant in the wine industry, and I was too, different types of consulting. She was handling like office oversight and vineyard management oversight and paying people's bills and trying to keep them out of jail. And I was on the other end of it. I was helping them divide their property and refinance their vineyards and whatnot. I had had a background with the federal government, so I understood how those bureaucracies operated. And everything was going along fine until Bonnie noticed that one of her clients hadn't been paid for 3 years worth of crops. He was a grower. And it was about $300,000. And so she came to me and she said, Michael, you know, maybe you can handle this. You know, Mark's not getting paid for his grapes. He hasn't been paid for 3 years from a very large winery. It's now called Francis Ford Coppola Winery. At the time, it was called Souverain Winery. And I said, well, I'll go up there and I'll see what I can do. So I went up there. And when I walked in the door, I got the news that they had just filed a Chapter 11, which in the U.S. is a bankruptcy, freedom from, you know, creditors, protection from creditors. So it didn't look good for the home team. So I knew that I wasn't going to walk out of that meeting with a check. But I looked out the window and I wanted to make some small talk because I had the floor. And I saw this room. I didn't know anything about wine, you know. I thought a limited release was some kind of a medical problem. And I looked out the window and I saw this thing that looked like a handball court. And in the middle of it was this giant machine, gleaming chrome machine, looked like a locomotive. And I said, excuse me, guys. I said, what's with the chrome locomotive in the handball court? He said, that's not a handball court. That's a clean room, and that's not a locomotive. That's a Crohn's bottling line. I said, really, does it work? And he said, yeah, it does about 3,000 cases a day. I said, wow. I said, that's pretty interesting. I looked out the other window, and I saw a big row of tanks gleaming in the sun. I said, what's in those tanks? They said, Cabernet Sauvignon and Sauvignon Blanc in bulk. And I thought to myself, isn't that interesting? Those are the same two varietals that you owe our client for. And then it hit me like a chrome locomotive. And I said, guess what, guys? How about this idea? Instead of you paying me money, which you don't have, why don't you take some of that wine out of those tanks over there, run it through that chrome locomotive, and pay me in goods and services? Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc in bulk, and run them through the bottling machine. And they said, okay. I said, improve their cash position. So I just settled a $300,000 debt with a trade. So I got it in paper. I went home to Bonnie. I said, hey, Bonnie, I think we got this thing under control. What do you say?
Yeah, well, that's not going to pay any bills. Now we've got more problems or challenges. We really don't have problems anymore, do we? So now the challenge is to figure out how to turn this bulk wine and bottling services into cash so the grower gets paid. So I went about getting all the licenses, and believe me, as you start getting into sales in the United States, you'll find out that there's a lot of licenses, a lot of compliance that's required. So I found out all about that, and I got my client all the licenses that were required. I started researching all the bottling supplies. I didn't even realize, because I hadn't been a wine drinker, that glass comes in different sizes and different colors, and whoa, there's so much to learn. So we did that. Then there was the concern of the label and the market. So how do we resolve that? We thought best idea would be go out and find out what's going on in the marketplace. So I sent Michael out to the marketplace. He got an appointment with the largest chain store buyer in the state of California, the chain store that bought the most wine in the state. His name was Don Brown, and the wine, this chain store was selling more wines than any other, so he got an appointment with Don Brown after some time, and he went in to see him. And how did your meeting go, Michael?
Well, it was pretty interesting. I had to wait a couple of weeks just to get an appointment. The guy didn't want to see me because he hadn't been doing business with me. And he says, okay, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. That's all you're going to get is 5 minutes. You'll be here 9 o'clock Monday morning. So I show up at 9 o'clock Monday morning. I don't get in until 11 o'clock. I'm waiting out there in the warehouse, and the forklifts are going by. Finally, there's a shout, hey, Houlihan, get in here. Tell me what you got to say and get the hell out. And this is my first introduction to the wine industry. I'm thinking sniff, swirl, mid-notes, tasting. Oh, get in here. See? So I get in there. He says, what do you got? I said, okay, well, I got Cabernet Sauvignon. I got Sauvignon Blanc. I got it in bulk. I can put it in any package you want. How do you want it? He looks up for the first time. He makes eye contact with me. And he says, nobody's ever asked me what I wanted. Everybody's always come in here with what they created. Then they hammer me with features and benefits. But you come in here and ask me what I want. Well, I'm going to tell you what I want. Get out a pencil. So I did. And he says, are you ready? And I said, I'm ready. He says, okay, give me a salt and pepper act. Make it better than Bob. Make it cheaper than Bob. And one more thing, put it in a pig. You got that? I'm writing this down, salt and pepper, Bob, pig. He says, can you do that? I said, yes, I can do it. So I had no idea what I just committed myself to. So I thought, he says, okay, get out of my office. So I get about halfway down the hall. He says, on Houlihan, one more thing. He says, don't make it a leap or a valley. Don't make it an animal. Don't make it a chateau. Don't put it in French. Make it in plain English. Make the name the same as the logo so she can see it from 4 feet away when she's pushing her cart by. You got that? And I said, yeah, I got that. I'm writing it down, 4 feet away, right? Name is the same as the logo, plain English, right? And I'm thinking, if I can ever translate this stuff, I probably just got a master's degree in wine merchandising. So I go to my friend who's been in the wine industry, he's 3rd generation, and I said, Hampton, would you translate something for me? I said, what's a salt and pepper act anyway? He says, oh, salt and pepper. He says, that's easy. He says, that's like Cabernet Sauvignon for the pepper, Sauvignon Blanc for the salt and pepper act. It's supermarket lingo. I said, really, really? I said, tell me something. Who's Bob anyway? He says, oh, Bob? He says, that's Robert Mondavi. I went, oh, not the Robert Mondavi. He says, yeah, the Robert Mondavi, the father of California wine. I said, oh, so the guy wants me to be better than Robert Mondavi and cheaper than Robert Mondavi. That's going to be a tall order. I said, just pray tell me one last thing. What is a pig? He says, oh, pig. He says, that's the big fat bottle of wine. That's the bottle of wine that's twice the size of a 750. It's the 1.5 liter, 1,500. He says, it's a pig. I said, oh, really? And then it hit me, again like a chrome locomotive, that I had been given the keys to the kingdom. Why? Because I asked. Why? Because I wasn't smart enough to know better. Why? Because I was scared. So I'd gone into the supermarket buyer and I basically said, tell me where the hole is. Where's the opportunity in this store? And it wasn't just the opportunity in his store, it was the opportunity in every store. So he basically said, give me a red and white varietal, make it about the same price as Robert Mondavi Red and Robert Mondavi White, nicknamed Bob Red and Bob White, and put it in a 1.5. And he also said, make the label visible from 4 feet away so she can see it. She can see it. This is a 37-second meeting. I'm giving all this information in 37 seconds. So I go back to Bonnie and I said, we need to have a label that has a logo that's the same as the name. It's got to be in plain English. It's got to be visible from 4 feet away. What do you got?
Well, it took a while of thinking to come up with anything, but we realized that we had a friend who had a product that was called Barefoot Bynum. It had been off the market for 12 years. And he'd never sold very much, but he did have a foot on the label. And that's the way grapes were originally crushed, was barefoot. And I thought, well, if we had the name the same as the logo, Barefoot is kind of cute, maybe that would work. It relates to wine. So we were out late one night carrying on with some friends, and we came home, and I said, Michael, go to the blackboard. I know what the label looks like it had just come through me. I said, this is going to sell a lot of wine. I said, so draw a foot, make it at an angle. We're going to make it like it's standing up. Davis Bynum's label, the foot was just horizontal. I mean, it didn't have any life to it. I said, it's got to really have life. Davis is just, you could put a tag on the toe and send it back to the morgue. But we'll put some life into this one. We'll stand it up and we'll put the word barefoot right into the arch. And that's what our label's going to be. So he was a bit reluctant.
Yeah, it was 3 o'clock in the morning.
He said, can't this wait till morning? I said, well, it's already 3 o'clock. It's, it is morning. So he obliged me. We took that design the next day, put it on some paper, and sent it off to our graphic artist who was designing our label for us. And she came back with kind of a squatty-looking foot, and it wasn't at all what I had in mind. I talked to her, I called her up, and I said, what I really want is a long, thin foot with a high arch. And then we're going to put the word barefoot right into that. And she says, well, I can draw anything you want. Just give me a picture of it. And I thought, well, where am I going to find a long, thin foot with a high arch? I thought, oh, I know. I've got one of those right here on the end of my leg. So I sent Michael out to get the biggest ink pad he could find. He brought it back. I put my foot in it, put it on some artist paper, and sent that off to the artist. And that's how my foot ended up on the label of the world's largest selling wine brand. So that was kind of fun. We had a label. We had the licenses. We went to bottling. So we had Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, the salt and pepper. We had it in a pig. We had a great label that she, who turns out to be the person who's buying the most groceries in the supermarket the most often, she wants a staple wine. She wants something she can pick up, with her other staples on a weekly basis. She can see it from 4 feet away as she's going down the aisle. So that big maze, it looks like a pizza out there in the wine aisle, this label would really stand out. We were so proud. Michael took the first couple bottles off the bottling line, and he went back to Don Brown. How did your second meeting with Don go, Michael?
Well, I actually got in a week. And,
that's progress.
Yeah, we're making progress. And same deal, what do you got? Get in here, tell me what you got, and get out. Doesn't even look up. I said, well, Don, I said, I've got the 2 first bottles of Barefoot wine in the world. And I pulled them out, and I was like, a school kid with straight A's, proud to show his dad. And I put them up on his desk. And I said, there you go, everything he asked for. Salt and Pepper Act, it's in a pig. You see the label from 4 feet away. Name is the same as the logo. It's in plain English. How many truckloads do you want? He looks up for the first time. He grabs the bottle. He spins it around a couple of times. He looks at it. He goes, are you crazy? Are you completely out of your mind? I can't sell this, he says. You put a foot on it. He says, you can't have fun with wine. This is 1985, 1986. Wine is serious business. He says, and not only that, look, there's no numbers on this bottle. This is non-vintage. I said, that's right. You said when she sees it from 4 feet away. We did some research. We found out that 78% of all your wine is sold to women who are 37 years old with 2.5 kids. They're buying it like a staple. They want it to taste the same from year to year to year to year. If it tastes different, they're not going to buy it as a staple anymore. It's not Saturday night wine, it's Tuesday night wine. Oh, I don't know if anybody's ever done that before. So this is the message that we tell young people today. You want to disrupt the market, get ready for some pushback, especially from the gatekeepers. But he says, oh yeah, he says, all that stuff's real clever. He says, but I can't put it in. He says, you know, nobody knows this brand. I said, but Don, we bottled it all up just for you. He says, I can't help you. He says, I'm not going to take it, and there's no chain store, there's no box store in the country that's going to take this because it's an unknown quantity. You're going to have to go out there and spend a couple $100,000 in advertising so people know what this is. I said, well, Don, I don't even have one of those $200,000. He says, well, I don't know what to tell you. He says, I guess you're just going to have to sell every mama, papa, and every broad market account, and every independent, because the chains aren't going to take this. I said, Don, that's going to take years. He said, that's right. You better get started. Now get out of my office. So this was our introduction to the wine industry. Now, we're from outside the industry. So you notice a few things. Because we're from outside the industry, we went into it with an open mind. We asked questions. We got answers. They weren't the answers we wanted to hear, but they were answers. And so I'm out there in the broad market. And we're going around from account to account. We went to about 100 accounts. San Francisco, only 10 took it. And they said the same thing that Don Brown said. They said, nobody's ever heard of this. Are you advertising? What are you doing to promote this? You can't just come into my store with a brand that nobody's ever seen. I said, just take it, it'll sell. They said, okay, I'll take it, but if it doesn't sell in 60 days, you're out of here and you'll never come back. And of course, that meant that the brand would get the reputation of being a non-starter. And this is why we tell people today, whatever you do, when you start small, be a big hit in a small place, even if it's only 2 stores, even if it's only 4 stores, you'd be a big hit in 4 stores, okay? And you're gonna hear more about that later. But just remember, be a big hit. That's the most important thing you can do when you start off. And being a big hit doesn't really mean big with a capital B, it just means big where you're selling it. So we get our depletion reports, you heard about those today, right? The first one comes and it's all Easter eggs, right? Zeros. We go, oh my God, we're going to get discontinued. We're going to get the reputation of a non-starter here. We've got all this wine bottled. What the heck are we going to do? About that time, out of left field, I get a telephone call. It's from a guy in Chinatown in San Francisco. He's trying to raise money for a kids' after-school park. He wants money for swings and slides and sandboxes. He says, oh, you're a big, rich wine country baron. I said, you got the right number? He says, all I need is $50,000. I said, I don't even have one of those 50. I said, but what I do have is I have some wine. So what I'll do is I'll donate some wine. You can auction it off, use the money to buy a slide or a swing. Maybe it'll loosen some people up. Maybe they'll write a bigger check. He said, okay. He took the wine kind of begrudgingly. Never heard from him again. End of the month, we get our reports. Start off just like last month, 0, 0, but then 10, 15, 20. And we look at this thing and we're going, wow, look at this. What is with these 3 accounts here, 10, 15, and 20 cases that were sold this month? And we realized they were the stores that were in the vicinity of Chinatown. And that's when it dawned on us that the kind of people who went to that fundraiser were already qualified wine buyers. And they sat there and listened to some boring speech for 2 hours with our foot in their face for 2 hours. And then when they went out to buy wine, and they could have bought any wine, they chose to buy the wine that supported them and their group and their cause. So we called this worthy cause marketing, and it's different than cause marketing. This isn't like buy a pair of shoes and we're going to give some kid in Africa a pair of shoes. This isn't I bought the American Cancer Society right to use their logo because I'm their official sponsor this year. It's not that at all. In that case, you're bragging to the general public about how good you are with the hope that the general public is going to buy your wine because you're a good guy. This wasn't like that at all. This was actually marketing to the members of the nonprofit organizations. We didn't care about the general public because we didn't have any customers anyway. If we could just get the members of that group to buy our product, that was a big deal for us. And then we did some math and we found out that when somebody really likes your wine and they buy it on a regular basis, well, what does that add up to? Well, it turns out to be cases a month. And so we found out that if we had a store that was moving 10 cases every month, that we didn't have 100 customers. We only had maybe 10 or 20 customers, but they were loyal. And they were advocates. And so as Barefoot grew and became larger and larger, and we went from state to state to state, and we were faced with all the challenges that you face trying to market your product in the United States, we relied on worthy cause marketing. We never advertised once. So now you have the largest wine brand in the world. They never advertised once. So this is what advocacy is all about. It's a different way of doing it. People talking about innovation. Here's innovation for you. So, Bonnie, you want to tell about the 7 sales? We've got one slide for you. Yeah, everybody's got lots of slides. We just have one.
But you can get it online too, and we're going to give you that information. There's a lot of infographics that we have available on our website. But we found that as we were going through our lessons over 20 years of building the Barefoot Wine Brand, we found that there were 7 sales that had to be made. And if we missed any one of those sales, then it wouldn't reach the end user. The first sale that anyone really has to make in any business is you sell your own staff. You've got to make sure that they're on board and they know everything about your product, they know all the benefits, they understand all the awards that have been taken, and more than that, they've got to be proud to work for your company. And part of the way that we were able to do that was we were able to show them that they all work together as a team, and that as a company, we stood for more than the product or services that we were offering. We supported the community. And so if they had a particular nonprofit that they were very close to, that was close to their heart, then Barefoot would support that as well. So that really made them feel more involved in the whole process, in the whole company. And we also had a policy that we believed that when your staff understands all your challenges and all your goals, that they're in a better position to help you. We would have sales meetings on a monthly or a quarterly basis, and everyone on our staff, from the CFO to the marketing director to the receptionist to the winemaker, would all gather in our conference room. And all of our salespeople throughout the nation would call in. We'd have a conference call. And we'd all be in the same meeting together. And we'd tell them what our challenges were. For instance, we had a challenge. I said, there's good news and there's bad news. We just got into Florida. We are now in the largest chain in Florida. It's a new product in Florida. This is our first chance to really show them what we can do. 635 stores. That's the good news. Yay, everybody's happy about that. I said, now the bad news. We're on the bottom shelf. Well, I don't have to tell anyone here, that's the worst place to be in. So somebody said, well, I guess if we're barefoot on the bottom shelf, we must be picking up the foot traffic. So that was fun. We all laughed about that a little bit. So how do we get people to look down and see our product on the bottom shelf? Well, someone said, well, maybe we could get some sticky decals, some purple feet, and walk people from the entrance through the store right down to the wine aisle, and then turn them and have them facing our product there on the bottom shelf. And then they'd be looking down, trying to figure out why the heck they're there. We put a sign there that said Barefoot with an arrow. People got a good laugh out of it. They picked up our product, they tried it. It was good wine. They remembered the label, very memorable label, name the same as the logo, easy to remember. We got a lot of sales. We called those sticky feet. This mic.
Mic's sticky.
Am I losing this mic here? We called them sticky feet, and that idea came from maybe I should put this, can you all hear me? Got another one for me? How's that? So that idea came from our receptionist. And the reason it came from our receptionist is because she knew what our challenge was. So that was one of the things that we did to involve our entire staff in our business and to make them all feel that they were part of the company and part of the sales process, which of course they were. And how else did we involve our staff, Michael?
Well, we believe that there's only two divisions in every company, sales and sales support. And it's because everybody who's in sales support gets a check from the salespeople. So in our company, we didn't have the pyramid, you know, which is the CEO, the vice presidents, the junior vice presidents, division chiefs, department heads, the squads, the teams, the groups. We didn't have any of that. We had a very flat company, all the way through to the time we were acquired. And the top was the customer. Under the customer came the sales division, which is sales and customer support. They're the only two groups in your company that are talking to the customer every day. They hear all the complaints. They know what's going on with the competition. They understand the change in the stores. They understand the dynamics of the marketplace. They know what it takes to stay relevant. And then those folks would tell the marketing people and the production people and the accounting people what they knew about the marketplace. So that was a different idea. So we actually reorganized our company so that sales were on top. And we had to. Why? Because we were desperate. Why? We were broke. We got all this wine laid on us and we had to sell it. So we didn't have a chance to be snooty. We didn't have a chance to be corporate. We just said, hey, we got to have some sales here. We better find out what's going on in the marketplace. We need feedback. Is this package right? Is this flavor profile right? You know, what about the cartons? Stuff like that. We had a situation in Minnesota where we were having constant misdeliveries, and we couldn't understand why. So finally, I got on a plane myself. I flew to Minnesota. Sure enough, there was misdeliveries in this MGM store. I went in the back room and I looked, and they had delivered Chardonnay, but they should have delivered Sauvignon Blanc. So I went to the warehouse, to the distributor's warehouse, and I said, what's with you guys? You know, can't you tell the difference between Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc? Oh, that's Eddie's department. You know, he's picking out there in the warehouse. You'll have to go talk to him. So I go talk to Eddie. Eddie says, oh, no, it's Billy. He comes on at midnight. He's the guy that drives the forklift and picks those wines up and puts those orders together. You're going to have to talk to Billy. So I said, okay. I said, what time does Billy break for lunch? Oh, he breaks about 4 o'clock in the morning. So I show up with a sandwich at 4 o'clock in the morning for Billy. And I said, Billy, you know, tell me something. Why are you misdelivering? Why are we having these misdelivery problems? He said, get up on that forklift. Tell me what you see. So I get up on the forklift. I said, well, it's dark. He says, that's right, it's dark. He says, that box over there, he says, what does it say? I said, I can't read it. The label's too small. What do you want me to do? Make the labels bigger? He says, no, don't make the labels bigger. He says, why don't you make every varietal in a color that is unique to that varietal, and we won't have these misdeliveries. It took us 2 years to get our production department to do it, but we were able to do it. We put every box in a different color. It cut our misdeliveries like in half. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with wine? Well, let's get back to sales. If you don't have misdeliveries, you have more sales, right? You have more market presence. So the stuff we learned about the wine business that we're telling you about now happened in the United States, but it could happen in any country. We wound up selling in 28 countries. We had these problems in all of them. But in the United States, it's really a big deal because everything's amplified. So, as you can see, we tried to say, well, how can we communicate this 7 sales to people the cleanest way? And so we decided, let's just talk about the links over here on the right. So you see the package? That's the chain, right? The chain breaks at the weakest link. So if there's any place along your distribution channel that is not connected, guess what? You have out of stock. You know what out of stock is? That's a bad customer experience. They love your product. They go back to the store, it's gone. Oh, they got a million reasons. Oh, the distributor didn't make the delivery. Oh, the salesperson loaded me up with a lot of product that wasn't yours last time, and so I kicked him out of the store, and that kicked your brand out too. Or we had it in here and it didn't sell because it was in the back room and it never scanned. See, none of this has to do with the price or the quality of the product. This is all logistics stuff. So the reason that Barefoot became so good, so big, so, incredible, wasn't because we were so smart. It was because we were so dumb. We looked at the situation and we said, we could have been selling hammers here. How do we keep it on the shelf? Because this is the point down here where the customer has to buy it. So we developed this chart and we tried to think of, what are the icons that we can use on this chart that would communicate the ideas. And the ideas of this chart are, why does everybody buy at every different level? They all buy for different reasons. None of them have to do with wine. None of them really have to do with price. Maybe that's how you get into the market. But the real issue is not the placement, it's the replacement. We could tell you horror stories of what we did when we started Barefoot because we did it wrong. Why don't you tell them a horror story, Bonnie, about Hawaii?
I will. I'm going to get to the second level of sales here, which is the distributor's ownership. And that's kind of scary. First of all, you put yourself in the other guy's shoes. Once again, it is, what's in it for me? That's what the other guy's asking. And you put yourself in his shoes and you ask yourself that question. As a distributor's ownership, what's in it for them to pick up my product, to pick up Barefoot Wines, for instance? Well, there's a number of reasons why the distributorship may want to pick up that product, and they aren't always pretty. Well, maybe they have a gap in their book. Maybe they just lost a product. That got us into Louisiana, I think it was.
Yeah.
They had just discontinued a product, or the product had actually been taken away from that distributor and went to another one. So they had all these accounts where they were used to selling, and they no longer had a product in their book at that price range, those varietals, to meet those sales. So we knew about this. We went in right away. We said, we've got the product to replace the product that you've just lost. And of course, all the salesmen are very angry about losing this product, so they wanted to show the other distributor that they could really go out there and make good sales in the current accounts that they had. So they sold the heck out of Barefoot. That was a very good move. That would be one reason why the ownership would want the product. Another reason would be maybe he didn't want his competition to get it. Maybe he did see it as a threat because it was growing and it was making good sales in the marketplace. He didn't want the competition to get it, being afraid it would compete with his own brands, so he took it in so he could squash it. There's a horror story for you. So when you're making a decision about who your broker is, who your distributors are, and who you're going to be working with, keep those things in mind. It's really important to understand what's in it for the other guy. Michael, do you have something to add to that?
Well, when you sell the distributor's ownership, they're buying for strategic reasons, and that's why we use the image of the chess game. So they're not going to buy it for any other reason except that it's going to get them into a retailer that they want to be into, and that's why you want to backdoor these people. That's why you want to make a sale in the marketplace to an important retailer. Then you go to your distributor and you say, this retailer wants this product, and they want you to distribute it to them. So now you're in. But if you were to go knock on their door, they'd say, you know what, we're not building brands around here, all right? So like they say in America, everybody wants to milk the cow, nobody wants to raise the calf. So now you get to sell the distributor's sales manager. So what's his icon? It's a sales chart. Why? Because he's writing sales reports. So what does the sales manager want? He wants to know that you have a representative in his territory. Maybe it's your broker. Maybe it's your employee. Maybe it's your importer. But he wants to know that there's somebody there that's going to make sales of your product even if his people don't and he knows they're not. That's interesting. Then you have to sell the salespeople themselves. And they're coin operated. What do they want? They want to know what's the commission, what's the spiff, how does this program work? Well, one of the biggest mistakes you can do is pay them so much a case for placement. What happened to us in Hawaii when that happened?
Well, Hawaii seemed like a real natural for Barefoot wines to be sold, right? So we went over there. I mean, there's sand everywhere, just like here, so many beaches, and there's footprints. It's like advertising for our product everywhere. Half the bars and restaurants were called Barefoot. This is a perfect place to sell our product. So Michael went over there. We got a distributor. He rode with the salespeople. He went to the accounts. He personally sold the accounts. And he did very well. He came back, and he was very excited. You know, I've sold a lot of wine. I said, wonderful. So a few months went by, and we didn't get a reorder. I said, well, Michael, I don't know what's going on. You better go see what's going on with those accounts. And you'll notice that we go there personally, because you don't know what's going on unless you're there and you see for yourself. So he went back. You know what he found out? The store owners or managers, they'd say, yeah, it was a good product. It sold through. As if that's the end of the story. We said, well, why didn't you reorder? Oh, well, you know, it was a new product, and I guess I forgot. And we looked at the sale and like, why didn't you pick up the reorder? He says, well, you know, there was another product that gave us, you know, a couple more bucks per case, and we were really glad there was a space empty on the shelf where your product is sold out, so we could put the other guy's product there. Isn't that nice? So, we learned a different way of compensating the salespeople. Instead of paying them for opening an account, or instead of paying them for selling a case of wine or so many cases of wine, we did it on the reorders. We said, you give us 3 months worth of reorders, and we'll give you a good commission. Not just on a case, not just on a new account. It's easy to open new accounts once you really understand how to do that. What's tough is to hold on to those new accounts. And that was a hard lesson that we learned. But by paying them on reorders and not new accounts, we were able to get our brand in a lot of places and keep it there.
So the incentive was for growth, not for placement, not for volume, but for growth. It's a very subtle difference, but it's a big difference when you take a look at the bottom line. Because how much time can you spend in a market opening accounts? Are you going to be like me, go to Hawaii and open all these accounts and everybody loves you? You go back 2 months later, it's all gone. They didn't reorder it?
He tried to go back a third time, and I gave him a little chart. I said, Michael, this is how much it costs for you to go to Hawaii every 2-3 months while I'm back here trying to pay bills. And this is how much we make. I said, you're not going back. We pulled out of Hawaii. We were out for another 2 or 3 years until we could afford to have our own representative on our payroll in that territory watching those accounts personally.
Same thing happened in the state of Washington. We expanded too fast. We went into Washington because we had a couple of chains up there that were really hot for our product. And we had a broker up there that said, oh yeah, this is going to be a big killer, go for it. Well, we went for it, but the broker did not police the shelves. The broker just got it in. You know, I know Harry. I'm friends with Bill, that kind of talk. Then the next thing you know, you're getting, oh, send more POS, it's not moving.
And well, lower your price.
And
that's
lower
what
your prices,
hear.
Okay? So the POS, it goes right into the hopper. It goes right into the garbage, right? I don't know if you've ever been in the back room of a distributorship in the United States, but every month there is a huge garbage bin full of brand new, unopened point-of-sale material that goes into the landfill. The point of sale that gets up in the marketplace is the point of sale that your representative puts up. That's what goes up. Now, there might be a miraculous case where somebody, one of the salesmen puts it up, whoop-de-doo, but not in the early days. Everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon. Nobody wants to push it to get it going. So once you're a big hit, oh yeah, they'll use your materials. But in those first months, that's really important. Just remember this. Don't get the reputation of being a slow mover. Now, you'll get some brokers that say, oh yeah, I can get you placements all over the United States. And you hear producers saying, oh yeah, you know, I'm in 5 states. Well, you know what you are in 5 states? You're dying in 5 states. It's much better to just be in one city, in one state, and be a big hit with a lot of reorders. where there are people who live in that state and that city who just love your wine and buy it on a regular basis. And they're telling other people about it. So you want to expand very carefully. If you expand too fast, then you get the reputation of being a mediocre mover. So it's better to go to the new retailer. Now here we are with number 5, sell the retail buyer. Well, isn't that the salesperson's responsibility? Yes. Do they do it? No. Who does it? You do it. So you have to sell just about every retail buyer that every one of your distributors' sales reps has, at least to get started, at least for the first couple of years. Which means that if you're planning on going to the United States or expanding, you have to be able to put that person out there in the marketplace. And this is an expensive proposition. You know, you got to put $40,000 out there as a base. Yes, you can put him on commission, but he's got to have a base, and you're out that. You're also out all of his transportation, the lunches, everything else, the supplies. So it's an expensive proposition to open a new state. These states are huge. One state, California, is the population of this entire country. So just imagine, if you say, oh yeah, we're in California. No, you're not in California, you're dying in California. Don't die there. It's better to go to one place and be a big hit in one town in California, and then span slowly. What we had to do is we had to get to a point where we actually hired, and I highly recommend this if you're going to go into the United States, get a cost accountant to work for you. Or even if you have to contract with a cost accountant. That's not like a general books accountant. That's a cost accountant. He says, this is what your product costs. The gentleman that put the chart up, you know, that showed all the different ticks that you have to pay, so you can figure out what your FOB is, what do you call FOB
Freight on board.
Freight on board, we call it in the United States. It's what you sell it from your winery for. So to work back to that price, you have to make sure everybody gets their cut, right? So if you're not making enough profit off of a new territory within, say, a year to open a new territory, then you've made a mistake. So that's why you want to have a cost accountant. He's going to tell you exactly how many cases you have to sell before you can open your next territory. So now we have a company called Houlihan & Jones, and all we do is help folks like you. And we help them mostly with their costing and with their strategic performance. What is your sales strategy? What are you going to do first, second, and third, and why? Or are you going to listen to some broker who says, yes, I know, Bill, I can get it in here. You can get it in there, but you'll also get discontinued there. So in wine, it's better not to be somewhere than to be there and be discontinued, because they never forget. If you're DC, they never forget it. So that's why you have to sell the retail buyer for the distributor's sales rep. And you'll do that for a couple years.
And what does the retail buyer want? He wants something that's colorful and fun in his wine department. He wants something that might be point-of-sale material that's seasonal, that changes all the time. Well, we found a way to accomplish that. We double-sided our case backers, our point-of-sale material. So we would have Thanksgiving on one side, we'd have Christmas on the other. It's very important. It would brighten up his section. He also wants to have customers come in that want to buy the product. So we would tell people at these nonprofits where we were giving our wines, where we were sponsoring the events, where to buy the product. We would let them know within 10 miles of where the event took place where this product was available. And we would put the names on a piece of paper and have them available. So the people that wanted to help us, because we were helping their cause, they knew where to buy the product. In fact, before the event, we could go into the retail stores and we could say, would you like to be on this list? The Boys and Girls Club or the community fundraisers is having an event right down the street, and anyone that has our product, any market, will be on this list. Would you like to be on the list? If they said yes, because it's kind of hard to say no, I don't want to support my community, they say yes, and then we say, okay, we'll put the stack right over there. So you've got an order out of the deal. That's pretty good, huh? So we've sold our staff, we've sold the distributor's ownership, we've sold his sales manager, the salespeople, now we've sold the retailer. Now, guess what? You've got to sell the retailer's clerk. Well, that doesn't sound right, does it? You think you really have to go in and sell the clerk? Well, what does the clerk do in the store? Put yourself in his shoes. He gets paid minimum wage whether or not he replaces your product on the shelf. As a matter of fact, if it sells out quickly, that's more work for him. He's got to go back and pull out more wines and keep replacing them on the shelf. Now, that's a real pain in the butt for him, and he doesn't really like to do it. So why should he do that for you? He doesn't care if your wines sell or not unless you go in there and you give him a T-shirt, you give him a cap, talk to him about the ball scores, something like this. Get his interest. Let him know how important it is for you and your product and your sales that he replaces it on the shelf. Like I said before, competition loves an empty shelf. That was one of our biggest problems, is we were a fast seller. That meant that the shelf would empty of our product faster than our competitors. That gave them an opportunity to get in there and take advantage of that empty shelf. If it wasn't restocked, another reason to have your own rep in the territory. In fact, we were actually discontinued from a store by the store clerk. The product was selling too quickly and he just got tired of replacing it. So he took the reorder tag that's on the shelf away. So when it came time to reorder, there was no tag there. People don't want to be bothered by these things. If there's a missing tag, you just move on to the next product, okay? Nobody's got time to replace the tag unless it's your sales rep. So the clerk decided he'd had enough of it, and he just removed the tag, the reorder tag, and we were discontinued in that store. It's kind of sad, but it's true. So don't forget to sell the store's clerk. Very important. Now we've got the seventh sale. This is the consumer. This is the one that takes money out of her pocket and says, I want this product. How do you get her in there? How do you keep her buying? How do you get her interests in the first place? Well, we had a number of ways of doing that, and I think we've already told you the biggest one. We supported the community. We supported the fundraisers that were around her market, the same things that she was interested in. She'd see our product at these events, and then she'd go into the store and look for it. In fact, if it wasn't there, she might even ask for it. Now that's what you really want. So our social media was developed in groups that were already in existence. We weren't trying to gain new people. We were working with groups that already were there. And because the name was the same as the logo, it was easy to recognize. It was easy to remember. And it was easy to pronounce. What do you know about that? It was simple. And it was fun. It had a cute little foot on it, right? People would pick it up and hold it close and say, I just love this label. Love. Now that's the word that you really want to hear about your product, isn't it? So we had the consumer in the store. We made it easy for her to find the product, easy for her to pronounce it. The only big problem we had was making sure it stayed on the shelf. And that was the biggest challenge that Barefoot had as it grew. Michael and I had it for 20 years. We started in 1985 with the grower, who, by the way, realized shortly that he wasn't able to take over the wine selling part of the business. So Michael and I took on the debt, and we took the bottling services and the bulk wine, and that is how we got into the business in the first place.
So it's kind of a get-rich-slow scheme, right?
Yeah, get-rich-slow scheme.
So you can see if this chain, these critical links are broken at any point, then you create this awful customer experience. It's called out of stock. And if there's one problem that you face, it's not placement, it's replacement. It's easy to get in there the first time. You can take a trip to San Francisco and ride around with your salesperson and impress everybody, you know, with how great the wines are in Australia. You can do that, and you'll even get a placement. But if you don't get replaced, you just wasted a big airplane ticket. So that's why we have the 7 sales here. And it's really important that you think about sales in the United States and in other places where they have 3-tier systems about every level and what everybody wants. And you notice the only person who's really interested in the quality of that product is the consumer. That's why the consumer comes back. Yes, it has to be fantastic, okay? But that's not going to win the day. You're not going to win the day with fantastic wine. You're not going to win the day with fantastic price. You're not even going to win the day by identifying a niche that nobody's seen before like Barefoot did. You're going to win the day because you're vigilant. You're watching that shelf. You're not listening to people when they say, oh, your wine's just not selling here. We had a guy who said, oh, your wine's just not selling here. It was in Michigan. He says, you know, I don't know what it is. He says, some stores your wine moves, in other stores it doesn't move. So I could have just taken that, but no. I got on a plane and I flew to the stores that it wasn't moving. And guess what I found? The potato chips were in front of it. Of course it wasn't moving. You couldn't see it. So that's why it was so important for me to go back and make this retail sales clerk sale. Because his boss was just looking at a screen. His boss was just saying, scans. Scans equals sales. We had a situation with Costco. Everybody talks about Costco. We were doing really good there. And then all of a sudden, sales stopped. We couldn't figure out why sales stopped. So we told all of our salespeople, go into every Costco, find out why sales have stopped. They go in, they came back, and they said, there is no Barefoot in those stores. I said, you got to be kidding me. They allowed it to run out, and they didn't reorder it. So our guy goes down and he talks to their buyer. The buyer says, you know, he says, it's just not moving. Our guy says, well, you know, it's not in your stores. He says, no, he says, it's in the stores. He turns the screen around and shoves it in my guy's face. He says, look at that. There's 6 bottles in every store of every varietal. My guy looks at it, you know, looks at it again. He goes, oh my goodness. You guys have programmed in a 1.5 liter 6-pack as a 750 12-pack. Of course, there's 6 bottles left over in every store.
That's what his screen showed.
And the buyer at the time was very upset that he was made to look like a fool, so he discontinued Barefoot for 2 years. So you can try to make things idiot-proof, but all you're going to get is idiot-resistant. Because every day they're building a new idiot. A better idiot. So when you go to the United States, keep the 7 sales in mind. Also think about why people buy. You know, don't beat them up with how great the Yarrow Valley is. Don't tell them about stuff like that. If what they want to know is what's the commission, what's the spiff, or if they want that baseball cap. I used to get on an airplane and fly up to Seattle, and before I did, I went to the newsstand in the airport, and I would always pick up the Seattle Times. And I would go right to the sports section, and I would read about the Mariners. I could care less. You know, if I got time off, I'm going to take a hike. I'm not going to sit there and watch a game, right? So I'm looking at it, and I'm seeing who's been traded and what they did in the last game, and then I'd get right to this guy, and I'd say, how about those Mariners? What do you think? You think Sullivan's got a chance? No, I don't know. You know, McGillicuddy, he's coming up pretty good too. And before you know it, the guy was buying more wine. But what if I'd gone in there and said, hey, you know, we got more medals than anybody else. We got the best prize. He'd heard that. He's already heard that. And I had a Mariners cap for him. So that's the kind of thing that, you know, we want to leave you with, which is put yourself in the other guy's shoes at every level. Ask yourself, what does the other guy want? It's not what you think, but it's absolutely necessary to keep the skids greased so that your product can go all the way through the distribution system and stay in stock. So it's been a lot of fun here today. We really look forward to coming here. We've been thinking about it for a long time. Sid says, come on down and tell them how easy it is to sell wine in the United States.
Piece of cake, right, Michael?
But it's a marble cake, all right, with lots of swirls. So I hope we've explained some of those swirls to you today. Thank you. Thank you.